Being here. Silicosis continues to be one of those issues that I can't wrap my head around the fact as to how behind we are in compliance. It's crazy. So, and it angers me. It angers me because we have videos and evidence since the 1930s. This is an old issue. People were dying. They were discovering that the dust was settling in their lungs, that it was this, either chronic silicosis back then. And now we have a lot of accelerated silicosis with some, issues of comorbidity in our workers, young workers that are dying. And because it's not it wasn't a reportable condition before the emergency standards started. We have such little information, and a lot of the workers that have been affected have been misdiagnosed. So the numbers are nothing. I think that the numbers are just so off to the real number of what people, the people that are affected are truly like. So I was doing inspections this whole week, site inspections, and one of those took place. I had to go from communities to communities, assisting sanitation workers. But one of the communities had construction going on, and it was heavily demolition going on throughout the pool area, and the units were so close to it, and I see these clouds of dust, and I immediately approach one of the drivers on the side of one of the pieces of equipment. I said, "Who's in charge?" And they bring someone out, and I said, "What are you doing cutting dry?" And he's like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, turn around, look at the dust clouds that are getting to the residents and all the area around." I'm saying residents, but do you know that this is not good for your workers? And he's like, "Oh, those are not my workers." Right? And I'm like, it doesn't matter. Okay, I'll get you some information, and we got to get people trained, but this is bad. I know that obviously you haven't heard about what silica dust is. And he's like, "Oh yeah, actually, yeah." So, and I said, "Well, you can't have this type of dust when you're doing demolition. Construction materials have silica, right?" And I said, "And if you are also doing demo inside that clubhouse?" And he's like, "Yes, we are." And I said, "Well, I am sure there's countertops all over the place." He said, "Yes, there are." Well, countertops, engineered stone. This is what we're here today. And sure enough, one of the residents came out, and he said, "Oh, I'm so glad you talked to the guys," because I actually approached on the side where the gate was, and I told the workers I signaled, and I said, "Please go ahead and make sure you use the hoses and wet this, because all this dust is gonna hurt you badly. You're gonna end up dragging a tank of oxygen in 10 years if you continue to work this way." And they're like, "Huh?" It's May 2025, and they're giving me a look like, "Huh?" So this is why, and I know Sam and everybody on this call is enraged when you see these things, when it's been a decade, almost a decade, that that federal OSHA came out with a hazard alert about silica, silicosis, and then now Cal OSHA with an emergency standard. So it's a lot to cover. We will not have enough time to cover everything. So we're going to highlight only some points. There's my information. Please write it down, take a picture, make sure you reach out to us. We want to go out there just like Sam with his organization. I am also fully bilingual, so we want to go out there and do outreach. I even offered to the guys that I found at that site, I said, "Hey, let's get you on board with a 10-hour OSHA card through the UCLA UCI Research and Education Center." So he got my information. Most of the time they don't want to do anything because it's also costly for companies. But hey, you're going to have higher costs in 10 years when you're hit with all these lawsuits, because this is knowledge that is going around, and workers do get angry when they finally go to the doctor and they say, "I'm coughing up all this phlegm. I can't breathe anymore." And the doctor sent me to a specialist. The specialist took an x-ray. He suspects silicosis because I've been exposed to all this dust as a countertop engineered stone manufacturer worker. And I've been doing a lot of these activities, or as a construction worker. And they get angry, and their families get angry. So I'm here today to protect both sides of the equation. We got to think of human beings. Who cares if it's just the employer, just the employee? We got to make sure we bring up the awareness. As I was putting together the slides, I noticed that there's a lot more information than there was back when I started talking about this topic many years ago. So when I was doing 30-hour outreach, for example, in construction in 2011, we had a lot of info, but nothing as what we have today. So I know Georgia Tech has put together a whole training program of 9 lessons in a video that is just a beautiful video and series of safety videos. And I will at the end just share those links because you got to make sure that you use them for training, no doubt. So there's a lot of resources now. Today we're going to highlight 3 very important things. The number one is the hidden killers, and what is it that continue to be the most dangerous silica producing activities in countertop fabrication. And we're not going to focus heavily on construction, but as you can see, construction is deeply affected, and we've done courses for silica prevention for the construction industry. But talk to Veronica if you want a full class just for construction workers. For the countertop industry is the general industry standard that was updated and it now applies, and it has very strict requirements. So I want to make sure everybody kind of keeps in their mind, okay, what are the most dangerous things that are going on out there? And Sam is going to have a ton of info also. Discuss some of the now available critical dust techniques. So now we have good technology that we can bring up to the table, but, and Sam will not let me be wrong here. And I know you have more info for us in a moment, but it's a combination of these engineered controls that will help you stay safe. And when we say that, we take it with a grain of salt because it is so difficult to keep these exposures in the countertop fabrication. It's so difficult to keep them below the PEL, even when you have tools with water, even when you have LEVs, your local exhaust ventilation, even when you have your sheet flow. You have to combination in ensuring and measuring. And then number 3, discovering the calorie protection. So we're going to mention a few. What are your rights? One of the biggest things that it's in place now is that after 2023, we are now required to bring and make available medical surveillance to the workers whenever they're exposed at the action level, which is something that was kind of tiered and was not done until 2023. Okay. So we want to make sure there's a lot of outreach, and I'm going to make sure that Sam helps us out with letting us know how to contact him and how to contact his organization in order to schedule these trainings and outreach. This is the super important part of making things happen, trickling the information all the way down to workers, because then they can organize and make sure that it happens and pay attention, because after all, they only get one physical body and they want to protect it for their families and because they want to keep working. Otherwise, there's no bread to be put on the table. So we all have, I'm not going to go into every single one of these things very in depth because, like I said, that's a specific class. But respirable crystalline silica is, as the name says, these very, very small nanoparticles, if you want to call them, that become disturbed when you cut, grind, fracture, cut, jackhammer, and fabricate and polish construction materials that contain silica, or in the case of the countertop industry, the actual slabs, right? And we can have slabs of natural stone and we can have slabs of engineered stone. They both contain silica. And the moment we disturb these materials, the powder, the actual dust visible from these operations, if you were to do a dry, contains high amounts of these very tiny particles that are invisible to the naked eye, right? And if they're invisible to the naked eye, and then when you're cutting dry, you can see a cloud of dust, that means that the concentration is so high that the person around this cloud of dust is being overexposed. And it is respirable. The word respirable becomes so important because that means that these particles are now in the air, but unlike regular dust at the beach, when you throw or your baby's throwing a bunch of sand up in the air, a lot of those particles will not settle all the way down into the deepest portions of your respiratory system, your lungs and the alveoli where the gas exchanges occur, right? In this case, it's respirable because the particles are so fine, they're not going to settle at the very first portion of your respiratory area, which is the nose, where the boogers and the hairs can actually capture those very big particles. No, these particles are going to go all the way down into the lungs and even to those passages where the alveoli, which are the very ends, they look like a bunch of grapes, if you will. That's where the gas exchange occurs. And this is why and where these little crystalline pieces of silica are getting encrusted and hurting the lungs of the workers, forming scar tissue known as fibrosis. And then because of the damage, your body always reacts, right? Your immune system, the macrophages go in there, try to capture those crystals. And what happens is they die in the process, and this scar tissue that continues to form makes the lung lose its flexibility. So now you don't have a nice, healthy, supple lung that can expand and contract as you breathe, but now you have a lung with a lot of scar tissue that is all stiff, and people are not able to take a flight of stairs because they can't breathe. They're wheezing, right? So the health hazards are many. We're worried about engineered stone workers precisely because of the high content of silica, crystalline silica, in the quartz slabs. They go by different names, and depending on the maker, the variation of the content of silica does silica in it in the slab itself varies. But for engineered stone, it's always 90% plus. So that's huge, right? Because in natural stone, we will see maybe 40%. And in concrete and other materials, we'll see a variation of 20%, 30, 40, etc., versus engineered stone workers who, when they cut, grind, etc., they're exposing themselves to a concentration of 90% or more when they disturb the slabs, right? So there are different requirements for the type of industry. For construction, we have table 1 of the regulation, which is the minimum required. If you want to go beyond and above that to provide better protections, that's really good. Just don't create a hazard, an extra hazard, just trying to be safer. And then for general industry, which we will focus in today, but if you're in the construction industry, jackhammering away, go back and look at that table 1, because you're not supposed to be doing what I found during my inspection, all that jackhammering and demolition without wet methods and controls to ensure that workers are not exposed above the PEL. And we'll talk about those briefly. What's a PEL? PEL stands for permissible exposure limit. And many of you on this call have heard those things, such as an action level and a PEL. An action level, OSHA says, whenever there's a contaminant in the air, we got to make sure that we know when is it getting to be too dangerous. We want to start checking there. It's kind of like racing a red flag or a yellow flag, if you will. Oops, we're at 25 micrograms per cubic meter, which, mind you, that's about what, if you got silica dust concentrated in half a grain of rice and you threw it in the air, that would be in a cubic meter of air, that would be the action level, 25 micrograms per cubic meter of air. What fits in half of a grain of rice? That's how little, right? And we're not even saying that that amount is safe. We're just saying, hey, that flag needs to come up. You need to offer medical surveillance as one of the workers' rights. And then the permissible exposure limit, which went way down from years past to 50 micrograms per cubic meter of air. Now, the whole grain of rice in a cubic meter of air, if you throw it in an 8-hour time weighted average. Sometimes we're like, what is that? Well, think about an 8-hour shift. A worker is not allowed to breathe in or be exposed per each meter of cubic air to more than that dust that fits in a grain of rice if you were to throw it up in the air in a 1 meter cubic of air. So that should make you open your eyes and say, wow, right? It's amazing. So we're really overexposing many workers throughout our nation in many different occupations. Today, we talk about the real life challenges for workers and organizations when we speak specifically of engineered stone. So there's a lot of, like I said, resources out there. This one comes from I think this is the California Department of Public Health. I have all of the resources down at the end of the presentation. I will make sure you get the presentation. There is the comparison that I was talking about and the action level versus the PEL. So because we've seen at least 10 deaths related to accelerated silicosis with some comorbidities associated with it, and 72 cases of silicosis of people that are dealing with it actively right now. And like I said, those numbers are nothing. Uh, California OSHA did have an emergency standard that got approved in December 14, 2023, right? And here you have one of those meetings by Cal OSHA. He spoke July 20th, 2023. He spoke about him being a 27-year-old and not being able to do anything like a normal, regular, young, healthy human being as he was before he was diagnosed and started having symptoms of silicosis. His wife is right next to him. He worked 10 years cutting engineered stone countertops. And if that doesn't bring tears to your eyes, I don't know what will. This is awful. This is awful, and this is why we continue to bring more attention to this issue. The exposure levels, whenever you're working with engineered stone or any other materials with silica, will depend on the types of activities, the tools that you're using, right? So for example, a regular polisher will depend on what type of wheel you're using. The location, are you indoor versus outdoor? The materials that you're using or cutting on or disturbing, the types of equipment being used during the task, the duration of the dust generating activity on your shift, and the weather conditions, right? You are required as an organization, if you have a shop where you are cutting stone, you're required to verify that your employees' exposure is below the PEL. And we're talking about the different kinds of workers who have exposure. So you have to do an analysis. You have to make a list of the job duties, the tasks, and find out which of these workers have exposure. Now I have to verify that it is below the permissible exposure limit of 50 micrograms per cubic meter, right? Then medical surveillance has to be made available, of course, and it says made available, but what that means is you send them to the doctor, they have an x-ray, minimum an x-ray, and there's some actual technical requirements to that end. You have to send them to someone who knows what they're looking at, so not everyone will take an x-ray and be able to determine if there's early stages of silicosis. What Georgia Tech specialist and industrial hygienist found out is that you need to be certified, NIOSH certified B reader, a NIOSH certified B reader in order to be able to interpret an x-ray from a worker who has been exposed to silica dust in this type of industry. All right. There is a little bit of information from Dr. Ryan Hoy in one of his webinars. I have the actual link there in regards to, and this is information that is you're going to find it all throughout the website for OSHA, Cal OSHA, and also for Georgia Tech, because they did a lot of the initial studies and they put out a lot of the initial information, and they put out those beautiful 9 lessons for us to look at or to view as a way to educate workers. So you can see the many variations of silica content in different materials, right? Sandstone up to 70 to up to 90%, concrete and mortar. There you go, jackhammers, while jackhammering away and creating clouds of dust. So 25 to 70% of that dust that you're breathing is crystalline silica, respirable crystalline silica. And that's the importance of why it's called RCS, because it can reach all the way to the very where the gas exchange is occurring at the alveoli, right, of the lungs of the worker. Brick up to 30%, limestone, marble, artificial stone is 85% or more silica. And it has also some other chemicals, right, that we also need to think about, because there's a process called lamination that the workers also do, which exposes them not only to the silica dust, but also to some of these VOCs, organic vapors. The Journal of Occupational Medicine and Toxicology put together a report, Silicosis in the Engineered Stone Countertop Processing Industry, and the pictures that I'm going to use are from that particular report. they make an emphasis on the urgent need to enhance occupational safety regulations. Um, Here is some of that info about the 40 diagnoses in the past 2 years. And Dr. Jane Fazio is one of the ones that started seeing these cases. And she said, you know what? I'm going to reach out to the clinics all around the LA area where we know that there's a lot of countertop fabrication shops. And I'm going to let them know that if they see anything within workers that have that kind of work history, I want them over here because I'm a specialist, right? And she did a lot of that outreach to make sure that these workers would not get misdiagnosed, which is what has been happening in the past, where they may be diagnosed with pneumonia or some other type of disease, when in reality they are in some stage of silicosis or some issue related to silicosis. Because as we know now, the health hazards are not just related to silicosis, but also immunocompromised individuals may have issues with latent TB that becomes active, and scleroderma, and all types of different immune diseases, and kidney and renal failure, which is big because of the way our body processes waste. Our kidneys are also targeted. And then the issue of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And we're supposed to talk about all of this with the workers as part of the hazard communication training. Such great information. That report that I mentioned does go over some of the history and the background, and how back in 1975 someone invented this vibrocompression system to make. And this is the interesting portion of it all, guys. Interestingly enough, when this process of putting together a ton of quartz with resin to make slabs was invented, we have a big gap of information from that, which that's the fabrication of the actual material of the actual slabs, right? To now, where we get those slabs already made to be processed. And the interesting thing is that we say shops that manufacture and fabricate, when in reality they're doing is processing the slabs that are already manufactured, right? Because they started being manufactured back in the 70s. And there's actually one company, I think it was Cosentino in Italy, who was held liable for not providing information about the high hazard of working with these labs, because we are in reality, as a global community worldwide, we do not have information as to the actual health hazards associated with the initial stage of the manufacturing portion of these countertop slabs. We are now getting into the reports and information of what has happened since 2010, when we had the first cases of engineered stone silicosis reported in Spain, and then 2012 in Israel, etc. And you can see the actual progression there. But it wasn't until 2019 that we started paying attention because of the cases in Texas. And what did we see? We saw accelerated silicosis. And accelerated silicosis is a more rapid and aggressive form of silicosis, right? It's a lung disease that is because we're inhaling those particles that affect the very deep portions of the lung. And accelerated silicosis is unlike chronic silicosis, that with chronic silicosis, you have this big span of 10 to 20, 30, 40 years, and then the person will be diagnosed. So it takes its toll throughout these many decades, versus accelerated silicosis, where the exposure is high in less period of time. So the lungs get affected more quicker, and the symptoms show up within 3 to 10 years of exposure. That's why we have Leobardo Mesa at 27 being hooked to an oxygen tank. Okay, so accelerated silicosis is often associated with higher levels of exposure. Yes, yes, yes. So here is that Journal of Occupational Medicine and Toxicology report. And there's the picture credits. So here it is. We have 4 types of workers who are exposed at any shop, any given shop. We have the automated tool operators, and mind you, those are the ones that don't have as much exposure unless they're doing 2, 3, and 4, meaning those kinds of jobs as well. And most of the time they are, because they're not just operating the automated tools like the bridge saw that you see here. So there's water going on with it, and the operator is able to stay a little bit farther away from the point of operation. Nevertheless, you have a lot of small tool operators, and the reason why, and people take pride in the work they do. The Georgia Tech um, series of videos, safety videos, put a one of the workers to speak about his experience, and you can see his pain and how terrible this has been, the whole experience. But he also talks about the pride he took in doing his job. He liked seeing that slab from beginning to finish, and the working with the tools. It's a form of art. You're forming it, you're making sure that it'll fit, that it is up to specifications, etc. So he really loved his job, and nevertheless, he remembers being one of those small tool operators that was doing a lot of the dry cutting, which, by the way, for those of you that saying, what are the killers here? That's one. Doing this operation, cutting, grinding, polishing, anything that is done dry is one of the reasons for a worker to be overexposed and to show up with accelerated silicosis very early in their working career. And then we have the wet polishing issue, where you have tools that have a jet of water or the center feed, which you will see as we go right along in the rest of this talk, that it is not sufficient because of the way the water is distributed by the tool or the jet or the center feed. It will not keep all the surfaces of the slab wet. So it needs to be combined. And those are the killers. When you're doing wet polishing with a tool that has a center feed mechanism, it is not enough. And these are the things that workers do not know. And I'm going to stop for a moment. I'm going to have Sam jump in and give us a little bit of his feedback here.
Great summary, Alba.
Thank you.
And yeah, it's paramount, the importance of wet cutting, wet polishing, especially around the little nooks and crannies of the stone, especially when the workers are rounding around the corners of the slab. That is actually a big origin point of a lot of silica dust and exposure that people don't necessarily always keep in mind.
Right. And I find that when employers have put those big machines that have the wet operation going on with the CNC machines, which are the computer operated machines, and there's water going on, they think, okay, so there's water, there's not that much dust, but then they find themselves in the corner of the shop doing those final adjustments. And those are the killers. That's where the overexposure, it will still happen. That's when you will still get those uh, limits of overexposure. And then lamination is another activity that they do, because many times the surfaces or whatever the specifications are long portions of slabs that need to be put together. And so they need to use a glue to put these stones together. And so now you have the issue of, oops, we cannot use water because we need the glue to actually cure, right? And so now you have heat guns and to dry the surfaces, and now that also produce more airborne dust. And as you can see, the worker right here is in his suit with his respirator, and now we found out, and thank goodness Cal/OSHA has put regulations, and they're tricky, okay? When you read the regulation, the emergency standard, you have to read and read it again and read it again, because it doesn't allow for you to just put workers on any respirator. Not just any mask will do the job. And so the regulation starts describing things such as high triggered exposure tasks. And those are the ones that you need to have your workers in a tight fitting, positive pressure or PAPR type of respirator. And it's not this. Have you seen any of those, Sam? The tight fitting PAPRs out there?
You know, it's funny, a lot of workers call it la leyenda porque it's some workers say it's like the myth, you know, like they always hear about it
La
from regulatory
leyenda. I love
agencies.
it. This is the legend.
Yeah, yeah. Like we hear about it, but never seen it in person. And yeah, it's a pretty expensive piece of equipment.
Nevertheless, it is required. And so now that it is required, I know that is giving OSHA some good teeth to go out there and start enforcing and citing employers because even if it's an expensive piece of equipment, and we're talking about, do you know about the price of those peppers is around like 15 to 1800 per piece, right?
Yeah,
Hey,
yeah.
but compared to a worker's health, it's nothing. And compared to the kinds of lawsuits and compared to the kinds of treatment that is associated with accelerated silicosis treatments, such as lung lavages, it even sounds very awful. That's washing of the lungs, right? Or lung transplants. So the cost is so minimum compared to the amounts of money that is going to be spent as these claims start pouring in. Because we are seeing more outreach, we're seeing more training. So definitely we want to make sure that workers know, hey, you got to stay safe. Hey, these are the rights. This is what you have as a right, which is the right to a respirator that prevents exposure and minimizes it under the PEL. And that's hard to achieve, very hard to achieve. As the years have gone by, we've seen that the PEL, even when using wet methods, so a tool that is got a jet of water plus an exhaust ventilation system, did not bring the levels under the PEL. It was still 4 times above or 2 times above. And so you're really with a question mark above, you're like, what else can I do? And then they started adding more of the wet sheet flow, right? Where we're inundating the work in water and not all the time you're able to do it. So that there it goes, the need for those pappers, because you're not going to be able to bring it down with respirators that don't have enough protection, what we call the assigned protection factor. So anything under 25 is not allowed. And so this other picture comes from that same toxicological study where this is the next type of worker. You have a support worker lifting this slab with the hoist. So you see a lot of hoist systems. These are very heavy stones and they are also exposed, right? They are grabbing and moving with a mechanical hoist. And of course, there is dust that is going to be disturbed. And as I see all these resources and stuff, it boggles my mind. It's mind-boggling the fact that these workers are wearing shorts. You see shorts out there, Sam? Shorts, ripped pants,
Like
or
on
the
like them
regular
wearing the
clothing.
shorts.
Look at this picture.
Yeah, it's not good.
So that's all you can tell already is that the need for training for what your organization is doing and saying, you know what, don't show up at the workplace with shorts or ripped jeans because all of that dust is settling inside your clothing, is settling inside your boots, it's settling through the rips of your jeans and on your skin. You do not want any of this. So we talked about this killer number one, and we say killer number one because it is killing people. These activities are killing people, and they're killing them fast. They're young. These are people that are starting life, 27 for heaven's sakes, right? Killer two, polishing without water, invisible threat because could just or even with water, you think you're a-okay when it is not covering all the surfaces, right? Or the cleanup with compressed air or dry sweeping. So there's that second wave attack, I call it, just because now you think that because you were working with tools that had a stream of water or, the big CNC machines have all this water, then at the end of the day, you start sweeping. And even if you wet the floor and you're hosing it and using a squeegee, right? Uh, Still the squeegee is going to leave, just like with your windows, if you do the squeegee thing, there's always a thin film that is left behind, right? And that thin film that is left behind, the next morning, the workers enter the shop, and what they're going to do, disturb with their feet all of the surfaces and all that dust, like we said, is invisible to the naked eye. You can't see it, and yet you're breathing it. You see how important this whole thing is? You're thinking, wait a minute. So if squeegeeing it with a hose and all of it is not enough because there's drains and grates all throughout the shop, and you're thinking, okay, we're at the end of the day, we're squeegeeing it into the drains. No problem, right? Well, remember, next morning, that very thin film is going to be disturbed. That's the second wave attack, right? How do you prevent that? Okay, so here is why we're distributing more of this information. There are actual scrubbers that now do a better job. They capture the dust with a HEPA filter. And HEPA filters are those that are able to trap those tiny, 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 tiny invisible particles of silica dust. So that's one of the things that you need to bring up to the attention if at your shop they're not being used, the scrubbers, and all they're doing is the squidgy, because that's not enough. And the lack of the comprehensive approach, right, is many times, as we were saying, I'm sorry, you have the issue, and I'm going to need water. Give me a second. I'm getting too excited. This topic is very close to my heart. Many times there's last minute adjustments that need to be made, just like Sam and I were discussing. And so they think, oh, we have all of these things going on in the entire shop. And then there's those last minute adjustments, not just at the corner of the shop where there's no engineering controls in place, but also, I don't know if you've ever done any remodeling to any of your spaces. The guys will come and they'll bring their tools and they will do some last adjustments at the site, where if it's kitchen, and I don't know if you've seen that, Sam, where they bring the slabs and oops, it doesn't fit. So now we have to do some last minute adjustments. And so workers now are exposed to that cutting dry because they don't have any wet methods on site when they are out there installing. That's for the installer. So it's another, that's killer number 4. That's also killing people because it's getting all that dust in their lungs. And I talked about the squidgy issue and the respiratory program that is not in place. And add to that the issue of poor or lack of good training program, where workers show up wearing the respirators with a beard. If it's not a respirator that allows for a beard to be there in place because it doesn't disturb the seal, like a full loose fitting piece, then you have issues of beard breaking the seal. And workers don't know what that means. And they don't know that there are some types of facial hair that may be allowed, but most of them are not. And even a stubble, right? The next day stubble, you cannot show up to work and try and put on a respirator that is tight fitting without being clean shaven. All those things workers do not know. Another of the issues that we find with the respirators is issues of respirators being hung throughout the shop. And then, all that dust is settling inside that mask because it's not being stored appropriately. And now you have silica dust all over the surfaces. And when you put it back on, workers are breathing all that dust. So here is more wonderful pictures. This is a combination of that water and the dust capture system, that dust decrease levels. Here we cannot tell for sure if that respirator is going to prevent the exposure above the PEL. Most likely not, because we've seen that these two methods combined still have overexposure over the PEL. So a better respirator is needed, and with a better assigned protection factor. Plus, many times it's also the inundation of water at the surface with the amount of water that needs to be there as well. And so even when wet methods were used, exposure were consistently above occupational exposure limits, with the highest levels among workers using pneumatic wet grinders with diamond cup wheels. So these are one of the highest levels of exposure. And this is that worker that does that small tool operation. And what's wrong with this picture? And I don't know, Sam, but I don't know if you've seen this actually out there in the field.
Like the water is aimed the wrong way.
Yes. And then he has one hand, so you can see how heavy it's not super heavy. They're used to the weight of their tools, but you can see the strain in the forearm. And then the other hand is busy, because these tools are meant to be held with 2 hands, but he's busy holding the exhaust system, right? So now you have an issue of ergonomics there. And I am not too sure that that's the best way to operate the tool. And then the water is totally, not ensuring that the actual it's hitting the actual point of operation. So a lot going on that may seem, if you don't take these kinds of classes, if you're not really digging deep to make sure that workers are not being exposed above the permissible exposure limit, you would miss it. You would think, oh, this is so good. Look at this. They have the water, they got the tools going on, the respirator, and the LEV, which is the local exhaust ventilation. But then you're missing all of the rest of this stuff. Where are we really ensuring that all the surfaces of where the cutting is happening are covered with water? What are the issues with him having to grab the LEV, right, the duct, and move it to different areas as he's moving his body to perform the job? Will the tool slip out of his hands? It's wet. Remember, it's wet. He's only holding it with one hand. So these are hazards that are created because of our need to start bringing down those issues of dust, right? This is a little bit of that extra additional protection with the water, the additional flow of water added to the surface, which floods the actual surfaces that are being cut. So that does reduce levels below occupational exposure limits. So the sheet wetting, the water spray nozzle, the right amount, the right respirator, etc. And then you can see there that workers who are being properly taken care of by their employers and the exposures are being assessed, you get the cyclone device in their breathing zone, which spins the air and captures those very, very small particles, and then it gets sent to a laboratory that is certified to deal with issues of silica. And you have to make sure that you do due diligence to have the right kind of industrial hygienist on site, and that they use the laboratory that is knowledgeable about silica and how to get all of those samples and measuring and to you, back to you in a report that it is adequate and per the standard. An effective wetting of stone surface during grinding using a water spray and also center feed. And we said the reason why, and once again, at first sight, it's like, oh, they got the water going. Hey, this is good. The reason why this is ineffective is because the water is not covering all the surfaces of the stone. And so you're going to have a lot of that stone still reaching the breathing zone of the worker, and you're going to have them overexposed. No doubt you're going to have them overexposed. So what respirator for high exposure trigger tasks? A full face, tight fitting powered air respirator. This is the one that we were saying, Sam and I were saying, it's expensive. That's the PAPR that, fully encloses the face, and it's got a motor that is pushing air onto the face of the worker. And for this particular one, we have it where it'll have not just the HEPA filter, but it also have multiple chemical cartridges for that task of lamination as well. So this is what is required. Workers also have the right to silica medical exams. We said that now after June 23, 2020, you have to be sent to the doctor if the silica levels are 25 micrograms of silica per cubic meter of air. And that is the action level. I made a mistake in the beginning. I said 2023. It's actually June 23rd, 2020. So the numbers got scrambled in my head somehow. And then here, it must include a physical exam and chest x-ray, but whoever interprets that x-ray, and it's very important that they are NIOSH certified B readers, right? Employer compliance is not the only challenge. We have issues with the workers themselves where they've been diagnosed, but they don't want to say anything, either because of migration status. They're worried that they cannot say anything because of their migration status, which has nothing to do. And OSHA has made a big effort in telling them, we're here to protect your health. We don't care if about your migration status. They have fear of retaliation, fear of being fired, etc. So they don't say anything, although they've had a diagnosis. Also, maybe the illness is being misdiagnosed. That's another challenge that we face, right? Because workers are reporting the symptoms to their family doctor versus reporting it to the employer and going to the right specialist. We also have more challenges in regards to small shops with limited resources and lack of compliance. So they're afraid that they won't have the money to get this CNC machine or all these wet methods implemented, where Consultation Kalosha is offering the service for free to get to your organization and help you implement compliance. And there was no specific regulation for this type of industry in the past. Now that has changed. We have a Title 8 California Code of Regulations, Section 5204, that now has brought all of these additional requirements, and you have to read it. If you are in this type of industry, you have to read the standard to understand it and to go through those nuances specifically for when are those respirators required, and then get your industrial hygienist to work with you and help you understand all of these issues that continue to be challenges because of the cost, because of the way they might work with your task, etc. The use of these materials, of the engineered stone material, has not been banned in the United States. It's been banned in Australia. So now they cannot buy, import, install, fabricate, none of it. Australia will not have it. And they are, no doubt, an example to us all globally, because what they're saying to the rest of us worldwide is, I care about my people. This is too dangerous. I'm not going to have any more of these cases. So now they do have regulations for the demolition of materials that are related to, countertop and engineered stone, because you have hospitality and homes and etc. with a lot of already installed engineered stone. So they're still going to have exposures, but they're not going to continue. It's illegal now to import, install, bring, buy, manufacture it in Australia. Okay, so I want to now talk to Sam and let us know how we can reach you guys for more outreach, and if it's bilingual, and what else can we do to protect workers? What have you seen out there that it can help continue to spread this message?
Thank you. How much time do I have?
Well, right now you have 10 minutes remaining, but many people stay for questions after 12.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. So again, I'm a health outreach coordinator at EDEPSCA. We're a day labor organization with 5 day labor centers across Los Angeles. It's a very overlapping demographic with that of stone workers. So that's why we're interested in this work. Um, So I think just to give a summary of how it's been for us, and I don't have any slides for this uh narrative, but we started doing silicosis outreach last May. So we're coming up on a year of doing this. Prior, it was done by Pacoima Beautiful, another community-based organization in Pacoima, and they've unearthed a lot of the problem of silicosis in the San Fernando Valley, which is sort of the birthplace, so to speak, of this industry with artificial stone in the LA metro region. So we were kind of figuring out the approach based on what they've learned, and we ultimately decided to focus on the southern and eastern parts of LA County because no one was really doing outreach out there at a significant level. And there's a lot of shops around, all sparsely dense, not as dense as the San Fernando Valley, but definitely all throughout the county. So that's why we say, you often hear people say we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg with the silicosis problem, because there's just a lot of business and industry happening where we don't know that it's happening. So basically what we do is we have a list of shops to start with, provided to us by LA Department of Health and California Department of Health, based on shops that have registered as businesses or just ones that inspectors have found. But as I alluded, there's plenty of unregistered shops that we don't know about that we end up finding out about. We've been to Wilmington, Carson, Signal Hill, Torrance, Gardena, East LA, Santa Fe Springs, and all over the county. There's been some good interactions we've had with workers in Gardena, Santa Fe Springs in particular. Um, it is generally it's challenging to do this kind of outreach because a lot of shops end up just being showrooms where they just sell a stone that they got from a global distributor in this retail sort of environment. So we're not in those situations, we don't meet stone cutters. A lot end up moving or they're out of business, so we're not able to reach workers and
Where they
also
make it seem like they're out of business. We're not doing anything here.
yeah. Well, I think legitimately a lot do go out of business or or they just move on to something else. And then some just have really strange hours. A lot operate on the basic 9 to 5 working hours, but then I hear about workers who cut stone at like late Saturday night. So it just depends on the shop. But as a public health initiative and a behavior change initiative, we're always trying to figure out what is it that we can say to make workers not only just be aware, but also care enough to make a difference in their working conditions. And it's that also has been a challenge because we don't necessarily have many incentives to offer. A lot of workers, from what we've seen, a lot of workers know about silicosis and they know it's bad, obviously, but they don't necessarily see how dangerous it is for them in their situation. They're just trying to get by and work and pay the bills. They may think, oh, we already have we're already wearing respirators, but it's not a PAPR respirator. It's just a half mask one.
Or an N95.
Right, right, which is totally inadequate. They think, oh, they pull it out, they show me, look, we're already doing this, we're good. They think, well, we throw water on stuff every few hours, so we're doing the water part, but they don't do it nearly enough. And we know that by the time they develop silicosis, it's already too late. It happens quickly. So we're we educate on the standard itself, the Cal OSHA standard, and what that implies for what the upgrades that employers and workers need to make. And we're trying to basically bridge the gap with resources. If the standard implies that you need PAPR respirators, the wet saws, um, we try to figure out a way to make shops to connect the dots for shops. But a lot of shops tell us they don't have the bottom line for that. A lot of shops have told us the environmental sampling, that's it part of the standard where they need to monitor the amount of exposure, so it's under the PEL. That's extremely expensive. We've had a worker or an owner tell us they would have go out of business if they did that. So these are questions that we're trying to figure out as we stand in between these shops and Cal OSHA. Medical surveillance is also an ambiguous field where what does that mean for workers' compensation, or what does that mean for helping workers get